a topic, something I know a lot about. So I'm happy to do that with you all today. Um, I am going to have some slides, and I think the goal of the session is to cover, SBIR, STTR funding, how to enhance, augment, leverage them for the benefit of your business. Um, and I'm going to work through some slides, and then leave plenty of room at the end for Q&A. So I'll do my best to work through those slides quickly, so that we can leave plenty of time at the end for all of your questions. We have 2 hours scheduled. I'd be surprised if we go the full two, John, honestly, but that'll come down to the Q&A section at the end. As we're working through the slides and the presentation, write down any questions you have. Let's hold them till the end, and we can run through them all there at the end. It's likely that I'll cover the topic in detail in the presentation. Um, okay, so give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. John, I'm going to just have a new version of Zoom. I'm going to log off and log back on real quick so I can share. Hold on. I'll be right back.
All righty. I think you're on mute there, Daniel.
Let's try this again. Sorry about that, y'all. There it is. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. Look good, John?
Yep, we see it. It looks like it's not in a presentation format. I'm not sure if you have a
Yeah,
preferred
that's
format.
okay because I may skip around. So
Okay.
as long as you can see the main slide, you can read the text.
Yes.
Voice over most of it anyway. Well, yeah, I'm glad you guys can see. Okay, so let's talk startup funding, licensing, IP as it relates to SBIRs, STTRs. The goal of the session is really to get you all to think about this through building a real company, not just a preliminary phase of achieving a grant outcome. So how do we work grants in parallel with commercial development, customer development, fundraising, team building, all of those things without being overwhelmed or over-focused on just the grants themselves. Um, so that's the goal of the session today. Write down any questions you have. We'll cover those at the end. Before we begin, just a little bit about me for those that don't know. I'm the entrepreneur in residence for Arrowhead, have been for some time now. I grew up in New Mexico. I'm a New Mexico State grad. I studied finance and management there before going on to ASU and some time in the Bay Area. I've been a technology entrepreneur for about, gosh, 20, 22 years now, across several different companies, several different industries. I bring an operator sort of business mindset often to very complicated, highly regulated industries like healthcare, financial technologies, insure technologies. And I've been really on the business side working very closely with technology co-founders, academic, clinical, um, et cetera. And I've worked across a number of companies that have leveraged federal grant funding, NSF, NIH, DARPA, anti-aging, and I've been able to do that fairly successfully across a couple of different ventures. And I'll share those stories with you, share that experience with you today. Um, I would say that I'm very much a scrappy entrepreneur. Some wins, some losses. So I can kind of share the good and the bad of fundraising and company building and exits and misses. And again, in most of the companies I've built, we've leveraged this kind of funding to help get our technology built and validated from an exploratory perspective, and even some phase twos have funded some really interesting commercial ventures as well. So that's where I come from. Right now, I own a couple of companies. I'm the chief business officer for a very large technology-based professional fundraiser called Colossal. The businesses I hold myself are in cybersecurity, focused on large-scale file share issues across enterprises. And then in healthcare technology, I have a company that supports hospitals with digital signage and digital integrated technologies. So I bring a wide set of experience to the table, and I'm happy to dig into that as we move forward. I'm honored to be here with you because I see some names I recognize. I see some folks that are building some really compelling technologies. Um, so I'm really excited to share my experience. So hopefully it's helpful for you. Um, so I just want to frame the conversation through the lens of a startup, early stage startup. What are the things that we really care about? How are we going to go from an idea to initial validation to initial revenues to initial successes, and ultimately how do we build and create the most enterprise value possible? Um, I just want to call out that there are four key risks that every startup faces, regardless of where you begin. You may begin in a national lab, you may begin in an academic setting, you may just be an entrepreneur who's come up with an idea and starting from the garage. You're going to face the same four risks in every case. There's a technical risk. If you're building any kind of technology, even a widget, you got to ask yourself, can it work? Right? Is it feasible from a technology perspective today or in the very near future? Do you have a market? What is the size of the market? And do the customers in that market care? And I think that's a consistent theme you're going to hear from me throughout the conversation, is that you really do need to have a market. You need to be able to penetrate that market and drive revenues through that market. And at the core of all of that will be your customers. So market risk, market validation, really important. And I think the third bucket is maybe the most paramount this early, and that's the team. Can this team execute? So if you're a solo entrepreneur, it matters to you. You cannot do it all by yourself. If you're a team, a founding team of multiple individuals that come from different backgrounds, um, you have to always ask yourself, can this team execute? What are the missing pieces within this core group? What can I add or what should we add to this team so that we can effectively execute on the company that we're trying to build? I found myself really struggling early days, finding the right team members and being able to balance. When I first got started, it was really difficult because it's very lonely. It's very difficult to attract and tell the story in a way to bring talented people to your company. So this is something that's always on the minds of startup founders, of investors. It's can you find the right people? There's also another message in that to this group is what is your highest and best use? So ask yourself today, am I a CEO? We're going to talk about what great CEOs do with SBIR funding later. But ask yourself, am I a technologist? Am I a product person? Am I a software engineer? And think about the things that you need to complement yourself with to make a full team, a full company successful. And the last, and I think the most important thing is capital. This can come in the form of non-dilutive grant funding, like we'll talk about today. Um, but but really, can a company attract near and long-term funding either via non-dilutive sources like SBIRs, STTRs, or by investors, or in my opinion, the best is through revenue. Keeping a company capitalized through the peaks and valleys is the most important job a CEO has, and it's going to consume your thoughts for the near and long term. So capital being a really important aspect of risk. The strongest startups reduce risk across all four sectors here, not just technical, not just market, not just having a great team. You have to take all of these things together, and the strongest companies are always constantly seeking to reduce risk in all four areas. in parallel. So let's talk a little bit about my opinion on the purpose and use of SBIR STTRs. They're a great way to explore and validate. They're also a great way to mature, sort of a de-risk way to mature and explore early R&D, early customer interactions. It kind of frees you up a little bit to maybe bring some additional resources into the company that you couldn't afford before. So they're very good in that early days of building and validation. But they by themselves do not ensure any kind of success. And in fact, they can be confounding. We're going to talk about that later on. But I think it's an important early milestone to think about for companies and to explore and view it through the lens of a way to kind of build early prototypes, build early interactions with customers, validate and mature some technology, um, but don't view it as the end all be all. Um, I primarily think about them as reducing technical risk, especially for some of the deeper tech, real more complicated companies I've done in the past. Those require a lot of early testing and validation, and having some funding set aside focused on doing that hard work can really de-risk and accelerate in some cases technical your understanding and analysis of your technical risk. They can extend runway without dilution. This second point I think is good. It's not necessarily really true. Um, in that if you have a company that is really engaging commercially, really building true technology that goes beyond MVP or POC, you're going to need more team members. You're going to need a little bit more capital than most of these grants will require. So think about it from a financial perspective. I would say that maybe a third of the operating budget would or should exist from a grant perspective at any one time. Um, so I caution founders, and I've learned this myself. You really can't build a full company with just grant funding. You need to find other ways to augment that. Um, this does improve investor readiness, and I always encourage companies and founders to look at grants that have some level of matching funds for your investors. That's a really compelling story. If you can match, usually sometimes it's dollar for dollar. I know a few that we've done have been up to several $100,000 in matching funds for our investors. Um, I was able to tell them, hey, we've been successful on a phase one or phase two, and if you invest, I'll match every dollar on a non-dilutive basis from a federal source. That's a really compelling story to attract investors, and it also helps validate your story that a big grant has validated you. You've written something that's been very compelling. You have something that's fundable from a grant perspective, and oh, by the way, I can further de-risk my investor by matching dollar for dollar up to a certain point. So it certainly can improve your investor readiness. It's going to help you tighten your story. It's going to help you think through technical, validation, commercial validation, customer validation. You're going to have to build a financial function around it. So that's always helpful. And in any case, if you can get matching funds, those are the grants that are really the most valuable and the most likely to build enterprise value over the long term. Um, And I think at the core of this, most of the folks I see on this call, most of the folks we interact with through Arrowhead are building some type of technology, complicated technology product. Um, these grants can certainly accelerate product development and exploration. And that's really the purpose of most of them. Okay. So that's my view on the true purpose of them. It's not the end all be all, and it doesn't really provide the macro long term, outcome that you're after. It is a very much a stepping stone focused in de-risking a couple of critical areas. I wanted to make a comment about IP and licensing. I have a lot of experience doing this. I see a few folks on the call that may be working with labs, maybe working in an academic setting, and maybe spinning out something that was, co-invented or invented and owned by a university. Um, this is a really important, it can be a very important aspect of how you go from essentially an idea or early version in a lab, both academic and national, into a company. When that occurs, you'll have to do some level of licensing with the academic or lab. Um, it's very likely that they own that technology because they paid you while you were building it. So in any of those cases, those are hotbeds for grants, because you in an academic setting in particular, you're constantly looking for funding for your labs. You're writing lots of grant applications. Those grant applications can fund that early development, but then, well, we may have a company. Most of your entities will have the ability to spin that out and stand up a company, and that will require a license agreement between the inventor and the entity. And so there's this really interesting blend of early development, kind of free and clear of the encumbrances of investors. It can happen in the lab or the academic setting. You get these really great ideas, this really kind of cutting edge innovation. But then what? What can you do with it? More and more, the labs, more and more academics are investing aggressively in these activities in support of entrepreneurial experience for faculty or for staff. So there are mechanisms that you can lean on to spin these things out and stand them up as individual companies. Um, so the process here it varies. I won't get into the details. You can always ask questions during the Q&A. Um, but if you have a great idea that's been initiated in a university or a lab and you want to spin that out, there's going to be a license. That process can be long, difficult, and sometimes expensive and require a bit of back and forth and negotiation. My advice to anybody doing this is to seek a long-term relationship, strong relationship. Keep your relationships as strong as possible across every stakeholder, regardless of how difficult the negotiation is or how heavy-handed that license agreement may feel to you as the entrepreneur. Um, because what you want to do is set up a virtuous circle among yourself, sitting in the new spin out, the lab in which you were born, which is going to continue to create innovation and have great talent and great data and great access that a company won't have. You want that circle to begin to build so that anything that's great that's coming out of the lab or your former lab is automatically coming into the company, and any staff that's kind of maybe growing from master's level to PhD level and so on, may be the first, pick coming into the company. And I'm going to give you an example of exactly how that can work on a company I did through ASU, Mayo Clinic, and several others before, um, where we had a very difficult and contentious negotiation on the license agreement, but we kept our relationship strong, and we had a direct line to the best talent and the best IP that augmented and helped our company, and we didn't disrupt either side. And in fact, it was a really amazing way to sort of blend the two together. So I encourage anybody who's working with those labs, working with academics, to seek that virtuous circle, acknowledge that you're partners, and take advantage of the best things that's coming out of those labs, so that you can again increase enterprise value in a very de-risked way. Um, so lean in, but remember, as a business, you have stakeholders, you're going to have investors, and you have a fiduciary obligation to them to build the best possible business that you can, especially if you accepted any kind of investor money. So you want to begin to decouple the company from where it was born, um, and protect your stakeholders. And that's more of a longer term perspective. But remember that coming out of a lab, you have to go off and build a company, and they are two very distinctly different things. Okay. So real quick on what investors care about, I think this is an important thing. Most of the companies, most of the entrepreneurs in here, if you're building anything substantial, complicated, it's likely to require a lot more money than just a small grant, right? It's going to require additional capital that's going to have to come from somewhere. Most of you will begin to seek investor capital if you're not already. Um, and for those of you with who are exploring that, investors care about four critical areas of risk. Remember that investing is really a risk and reward calculation. Most investors are looking at SBIR funded companies across four key areas: technical risk, which we talked about. Can the technology work? Market risk is really an analysis of market size an investor. VCs want very big markets. They want groundbreaking technology that's disruptive, that can capture big markets quickly. Um, and they want business models that are effective, often SaaS and other things and licensing, et cetera. But the reality is that they want big markets with big customer bases that are ripe for disruption, and they care a lot about how a company can de-risk that path to market. Think about how long is it going to take me to get to that market? If I'm starting with an idea now that's SBIR funded, say a phase one, um, I'm going to work on the technology risk. I'm going to de-risk that bit of technology. What can I be doing to de-risk the market? How can I engage with market assets, market stakeholders to deeply understand their sentiment, their perspective, and balance the technology development with that market development? Investors will care a lot about any company, not just SBIR, STR, TGR funded, any company that is doing the hard work from a market perspective, a customer discovery perspective, that deeply understands the problem space that they're entering and has a solution that's very, very compelling to solve that problem. And hopefully the market is substantial. We've talked about team. Team is really critical from an investor perspective. They need to know that the team that's building this technology is well-rounded, has the appetite to go outside of an academic or a research setting into a commercial, setting, and they're comfortable making that transition, or they've already done it before. Um, that team risk from an investor for early stage companies is you're really betting on people. You're going to do the technical analysis. You're going to do the competitor analysis. You're going to do the market analysis, but they're going to sit across from you and need to really truly believe that you're the right team to take this idea out of a early stage exploration into something that's very, very commercially viable. Um, and then financing risk to me, the SBRs, again, as I've said, can provide a, small but not it's going to be insufficient over the long term to fund what most of you are building. So it becomes a financing risk. How do we go from, say, a $250,000 phase one to X number of millions in revenue to fund the growth of the company? Or how do we build the technology to a place and the market validation to a place where we can fund X number of millions of dollars in venture funding or investor funding? Then from there, how long will it take to get us to a substantial revenue via our customer base? There's a sequencing investors will do there. There's a financial analysis and a calculation they'll do there. But it really is important to understand that the SBIR and STTR function early will not be sufficient. It's not a sufficient story to say, well, we have a NIH phase one, and we're going to go from here to here, and then we'll get into thinking about, finance. Then we'll get into thinking about revenues. Then we'll get into thinking about markets. Investors will care a lot about these four areas, and it's important that you as CEOs, you as operators, you as founding teams are thinking about these four areas of critical risk, because the SBIR will not fund you till the end. What do investors love about SBIR companies? So I've interacted with a lot of investors across several companies. Some investors view SBIRs as great, right? They think it's a great way to validate early technology, get some initial technology and commercial validation and traction. Um, that's where, those investors with experience in backing companies like those will focus on technical and commercial validation. They'll look at the efficiency that you can gain by adding this kind of non-dilutive capital and what outcomes those SBIRs are aimed at, which is a critical point. Are your are your grants written and targeted in a way that builds and maximizes enterprise value and commercial likelihood of success, or are they a distraction, right? So they love companies that have grant funding in place that really is targeted to building the maximum level of enterprise value. They don't like distractions. So investors will love those ones where, hey, you've written an SBIR, you've got it, it's provided a great level of capital, and you're working on a product or an innovation or a technology enhancement that complements your commercial strategy very nicely. And then they're always worried about proprietary IP, the moat, the freedom to operate, especially for anybody who's building, deep tech, AI tech, device tech. Um, that IP piece is important. That gets back up to anybody who's working with academics or national labs to help build your technologies. Who owns what? Are those agreements in place? If not, when can they be? Who owns or who might have rights to that IP? And is that IP situated in such a way that really truly gives a freedom to operate and protection, or is it just optics, right? Is it just a story? And they'll dig into that. But investors will love companies that have thought deeply about their IP and freedom to operate roadmap. Um, what they'll worry about, and what I see a lot of the companies I talk to that are seeking SBIR or early, phase ones, um, state level funding, is that they grow a dependency on that. They view that as kind of the end all be all. There's a real focus on it. And what you see is that, they'll talk about revenues, quote unquote, and that revenue oftentimes manifests in grant income and or consulting. So we worry deeply about any company that shows the early signs of being dependent on grants. Um, I've talked about team. I'm going to just bring it again. Uh, Oftentimes, teams that are focused on these grants will over allocate time, energy, and resource to the early validation phases in the absence of working on customer engagement, investor engagement, true business building. They'll over allocate too much time on getting the grant technology right, and they'll miss the bigger picture. So consider your highest and best use for everybody on the call. That term, highest and best use, is aimed at understanding what you're best at, understanding what you're not great at, and adding to your team or your skill set those missing pieces so that when an investor brings the team question, you have a really, compelling answer. Um, we worry a lot about weak customer engagement. So this is a tricky one because you're many of you are maybe technology focused, right? You like to build technology. Um, you'll have to find time consistently to engage with customers and deeply understand their sentiments, um, where they sit. Will they buy your product? If so, what does that time to market look like? Um, you really need to understand your customer base. And so what oftentimes happens is you've over allocated time and energy on the technical side, and you've missed the customer side. You've missed the financial side. You've missed the business model side. And that's really easy to suss out in my early conversations with companies is teams that over allocate to technology have very weak answers on customers and very weak answers on business model. And that's maybe okay in the very, very short term, but over the long term, you really want to build that muscle. The other thing is like we do see SBIR funding. We see a lot of great ideas that really don't have a path to scale. Maybe it's a super limited niche market. Um, maybe the market is not yet ready. Maybe it's going to take 10 years to build a tech like space tech, for example. So there's no real path to scaling the technology in the near or the long term. Investors will care a lot about that. Can you get to revenue and how fast and steep is that ramp when you get into revenue? And I would close with, we see this a lot, is technology searching for a market. Um, a lot of inventors, a lot of early stage, especially technology individuals, will believe that their technology has never been seen before. Nobody else is thinking about it. Nobody's doing it this way. We're the only one that could ever do this. And the reality is that's probably not true. There are probably other teams, other people thinking about same or similar problems, and you get so stuck and so focused on the technology, you forgot to pick your head up and make sure that what you're building solves a really large, critical problem. It might solve a problem for a few folks, but is it going to solve a problem for a big enough market? And then what ends up happening is you've built out now validated technology, and you're going to try to go find a market, and that's a path to failure. So these are the things that investors will really evaluate any SBIR funded companies. There are more, and we can talk about the other ones, but these are the ones I wanted to call out early in the presentation. There is a real difference between technical progress and company progress. So as I mentioned, these early grants are really aimed at furthering technology validation, but in almost all cases, at least all the ones that I have done, you have to write a commercial portion of the grant application. You have to say something about what you think your commercial universe will look like. Um, and again, there's always an overallocation to technical progress. And technical milestones are really important, but they're not sufficient for building a proper company. Um, you have to be able to do two things at once. Yes, achieve your technical aims with any grant that you write. Yes, you have to do that. No, you have to report on that, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But in parallel, you must also execute the commercial side of that grant. You must validate and generate customer demand, work to get into pilot programs, early POCs, early MVPs, early adopters, people that will start to use the product as it's being built or have agreed to use the product once it's built. You want commercial partnerships too. Partnerships can be a critical aspect of enterprise and company building. Oftentimes you can't do it alone. I know in a few of our businesses we've leaned on channel, to gain access to markets where we've built long-term strategic relationships where our channel partners make money when we do. We've built data relationships and integration relationships with strategic partners that augment or enhance the visualization or the understanding of our models. Um, so there's a whole host of partnerships that also should be accelerated and explored during this early phase. Um, and you really do want to understand your revenue potential. You really do want to understand your sales motion, right? How long, by motion, I mean, how do you get to the key stakeholders? Who are they? What is the archetype of that individual decision maker? How does a decision get made at your customer, right? Is it a procurement process? Is it usually an RFP? Does it take 6 months? Does it take 24 months? Um, who do you talk to? And importantly, what is the potential of the markets that you're looking to enter? Are these big, attractive markets, or are they very small and niche? And small and niche is okay, but then that changes the way you think about your fundraising and the size of your team and how long it will take you and overall the financial outcome of both you and your stakeholders and your founding teams. So I say all that to say that technical progress is important. And a lot of the grants that I leaned on early were very much aimed at technology validation, R&D, exploration. But in all cases, at least from my experience, there was this commercial piece. And we made certain that we were making as much or more progress with our commercial side, our company progress, our enterprise building, as we were on the technology side. It's a really important balance you have to consider and work on every day. The day-to-day, as I'm indicating, is tricky with a lot of these grants. Okay, so we dealt with phase one and phase two, primarily NSF and NIH, some NIHing and some DARPA. In every case, those are essentially their own projects, right? They have their own accounting, they have their own team allocations and their own time, direct and indirect costs. I'm sure many of you are familiar. Um, but it's really important that you understand how robust, complex, cumbersome the governance of those grants, the accounting and reporting of those grants, the access to the team members and where they sit. Are they contractors? Do they work in an academic setting? Are they full-time? Can you use direct? Can you use indirect? All of these complexities that come with each grant need to be considered in your day-to-day because it's not all that you're doing. It will not and should not be all that you're doing. So please ensure that you understand the day-to-day, both in the near term and the long-term view of the grant. Aim those grants to the best of your ability at what you believe your North Star to be. Your North Star being, how do we create the biggest, highest value company possible? If you do that, you've solved the problem that you're after. Um, So some carry significant financial reporting, governance issues, resource utilization requirements. You can only use certain people for certain times. So it's really important you understand that it's not a, hey, here's a check, Godspeed. You do have to and should take very careful accounting of everything that you're doing underneath these grants. And it's common to overfocus on fulfilling the grant requirements, even as your company will change. Several of our grants, we wrote them with the idea that we were gonna, I'll give you an example now. We were going to build a speech language pathology application under the A2 company I'll talk about later. So we wrote a grant. We were very successful. In fact, it helped us lead to fundraising. And we got into customer discovery. We started to build the app. We immediately realized, well, SLPs don't have any money. There's no access to business there, right? So we needed to fulfill the grant while also pivoting into different markets. Um, so do the best you can to write the grant, aim the outcome at your North Star, but understand that your business will change. Your business priorities, your focus will change. As startups, there will be lots of bright and shinies. There will be lots of opportunities, um, that are going to come to you and you say, well, we could solve that problem. Oh, we could solve that problem. We could aim the tech over here. So your company priorities and focus will change, not can, they will throughout the time frame of a grant. So it's really important that you don't over focus on just the grant, that you watch and listen and learn from those external forces, and that you be nimble enough to change when you need to. Um, the best companies that we see blend this grant and exploratory work with true company building, right? With true explorations of commercialization. You don't want to do them in sequence, you want to do them in tandem. Um, the last thing I will say about these grants is they're slow. These things take a long, long, long time, both to get, like the decision, the application, the writing and the application process. Then you sit and you wait and you listen. Okay, we've got a grant, and that's going to need to be executed over X number of months. Well, in today's technology environment, as you all know, it changes every day. The pace at which it's changing is really, really rapid. So this is just a cautionary tale again from somebody with experience. The grant life cycles do not move at the pace your company will move. Okay, so it's incumbent upon the primary operators, founding team CEOs in particular, to ensure that the company isn't overly beholden to the pace of the grant life cycle. You won't be successful if the grant life cycle is driving your pace. That's not good news for the long-term success of the business. So what do great founders do during phase ones? As I mentioned, work two tracks in tandem, build and execute your technology goals, demonstrate feasibility, got to validate all your assumptions. If you're at a phase where you've got some initial versions built, you got to be testing, you got to be revalidating, rebuilding. And then again, don't forget about the commercial goals. It's really, really important that you're forever in pursuit of meaningful customer interactions and preferably with an eye on very near-term revenues. That's the most important thing you can signal to yourselves. It validates your company, but it'll also validate you in the eyes of investors above everything else is commercial traction, customer traction. Understand your sales motion. And then that willingness to pay, I think, is a really important thing. What will your customers pay? What does that pay cycle look like? What is the likelihood that they'll stick with you for how long? So you can determine your lifetime value, things like that. You put all that into a pot. That's your commercial side. You've got to work them together. The best teams have technical teams and product teams focused on the technology goals of the grant and some level of commercial activity, preferably an operator with experience working on commercial goals. Those two things working together is the best possible thing you can do as a founding team. Um, as you get a little bit later, these phase twos can be really, really fun because you've gone past that validation phase and now you're really working to prove something out even further. This is commercializable, may not be a word. There it is. Here at this phase, you've probably been around for a few years, and the goal now becomes, hey, am I financeable? Am I commercially effective? Can I be really in market in revenue with a product that's functioning and working beyond just the earliest, R&D phases. Lab-based code is not enterprise code, I always say. So, can we get to something that's enterprise? Can we get something that's commercializable and viable? Do we have pilot customers? Can we embed our strategic partners and do those API integrations I talked about or channel deals? And we should be by now interacting with investors. The vast majority of people on this call will not be able to fund what you're building based on an initial grant and or super early revenues. Hopefully you get both and you're engaging with investors and you're really refining your narrative and you're having consistent interactions during this phase. Um, and you're learning how to get that financing done. Um, and hopefully you're building your commercial roadmap. Again, you're going a little bit beyond here, just purely technology validation. You're trying to really cross the chasm and get into market and revenues. So that's where your focus will be is, hey, you'll notice that these last four are all focused on going from, okay, we got a bit of technology. Let's get it out into market. Let's talk to investors. Let's talk about capital. Let's talk about team, et cetera. So a consistent trap. I've done this, um, and we see this a lot. These are the warning signs that you really want to be cognizant of. Is if your story that you're telling, if you tell a true story to say an investor, you've done a pitch, and somebody asks you, okay, tell me about your revenues, your financial side. And if the vast majority or all of any inbound money is grants, that can be a bit of a warning sign, especially if there's multiple and it's over a few years. That shows us that you're stuck in the technology R&D side and you haven't really been able to cross the chasm or tell any story about anything beyond that early sort of grant funding. It's really easy to spot companies that aren't interacting with customers, um, or that haven't gained any legitimate traction. That's very easy to see. That's a signal to us that, too overly focused on the grant and R&D. And there's been no significant commercialization milestones. So if you haven't signed even a letter of intent or an MOU, you don't have a funnel that's building value. Uh, there's no, you know, there's no customers. There's no any activity there. No major milestones. Again, a signal that you might be too focused, too consumed by the technology R&D. Um, and so a question that you should ask yourself, if your grants disappeared tomorrow, would your company survive beyond that? If so, for how long? And as I've said before, the primary job of any CEO or founding team is you have to ensure that the business has enough capital to function, has enough capital to get to the next milestone. That's the primary thing that you are focused on. Everything comes. The answer to all your questions is money. Everything comes from that. So um, don't fall into that SBIR trap. They're super useful for that early R&D. They're the most useful when it's complemented aggressively with all of these commercial and business side activities. So let me tell you a couple of examples. So I have had some wins and losses, as I've said. One of the companies I'm most proud of is Arl Analytics, which was a speech app focused on neurological and respiratory conditions. What we did was we took the human speech signal, analyzed it across several different parameters to identify neurological or respiratory conditions, analyze the efficacy of different therapies, provide a detailed analysis of the full working function. Most people don't know, but it's one of the most complicated things that we do. You have to take in air, which engages your respiratory system. You have to sequence all the thoughts and words in your mind, which engages all these other things. All your muscles have to work in concert, which is a measure of motor function. Really complicated signal. And so we took an amazing bit of R&D tech, lab-based tech out of ASU, um, and we spun that technology out into a company we called A2, Arl Analytics. Um, that spin out was done with two academic founders, my two co-founders, who were tenured professors at ASU and are still there today. And then myself as the third co-founder, we worked very closely with SkySong, which was the ASU Tech Transfer Office, to set up and provision the company receiving an exclusive access to any IP that was relevant to the company's operation, and also contracts with the tenured professors so that they were involved with the business on the day-to-day basis, although not full time, which I'll talk about in a minute. Um, and we also engaged with MIT, Mayo Clinic, and a few others, Barrow Neurological, a few others to generate new IP and generate new grants for future R&D. Really, really complicated bit of technology um, that was achieved on two funding fronts early. Actually, I should say three. We were grant funded through the academic early. That's how Julie and Visar, my co-founders, built their initial data sets and the initial validation of the technology. Then we spun that out into a company. The company started in revenue from day one. We had a commercial venture with a large pharmaceutical company to use the technology as an exploratory endpoint in a clinical trial for ALS. Um, so we had some initial revenue traction. We had grant traction through the academic, and we were constantly writing grants to get us to the next level of technology across several different neurological conditions. So for us, we wrote grants aimed at Alzheimer's or at motor disease like Parkinson's through Michael J. Fox and others. Um, we wrote defense technology because of concussion, depression, anxiety for the for soldiers. So we began to look at markets that we thought were big and attractive. We look for opportunities through NSF, NIH, DARPA, and others. Um, we would complement those grants with key strategics like Mayo or ASU or MIT or Barrow. We brought them together in the grant application, and we use that to future develop into new and interesting markets off the core base of our technology that was developed in the academic. So, so we used the sequencing of grants across those funding organizations. We built internally a team kind of through our finance and HR side of the business to set up project management and financial management systems that governed and made sure that we were on track and reporting effectively, and we didn't over allocate, under allocate funds. We didn't over allocate direct or indirect. We had that internal project management function because we had multiple going at any one time at different phases. So that governance structure was something I learned very, very quickly was, hey, these are complicated. They have a lot of important details in them. We need to do them right. We need to report on them right. And and so we did that. So internally we set up, part of a couple people's job was to make sure that we were running these grants effectively and reporting out effectively. From a technology and a product development perspective, we only wrote grants that we really fundamentally believed would augment and enhance the technology. And above that, always, my team and my commercial team was signaling to our technology and our research teams, hey, this is a market we think has real potential. So we were engaging with strategics and potential customers across all sectors and driving that learning into our technology teams and our grant writing teams so that we were aiming those grants to the best of our ability at areas we thought unlocked significant market value long term. So we had set up a really nice virtuous circle where we would lean on our academic and institutional partners. We would set up IP engagements so that the company had exclusive rights to any IP, data, technology that was generated through those grants or those interactions. And we achieved multiple grants that had matching funds, which unlocked blue chip venture capital through a group in Boston and a whole bunch of other folks to fund our seed through Series B. And all of that working in tandem unlocked, FDA's first speech biomarker status, which is now in multiple markets for different diseases. We embedded it across several different large institutional partners like IQVIA and Metadata, large pharmaceutical platforms. Um, decentralized trial systems via our APIs. We had our own standalone products, which were used by SLPs and different clinical partners. Um, and we were in 26 languages across all continents, um, with lots and lots of, I mean, most of the big 10 pharma used our systems if they were doing neurological clinical trials. So it was a really successful journey. Um, Hard, complicated. We didn't get all the grants that we applied for. We got a few that ended up providing technology that we didn't use. But we set up this really nice virtuous circle among all these parties, and it worked exceptionally well. Um, so very proud of that. The second example I'll share with you is more of a corporate generated bit of technology. It's a company called Patient Signs, which we recently got acquired. That was incubated with Phoenix Children's and then backed by venture and family office. So we used an internal clinical and technology team to set up and validate the technology across the clinical system, across the hospital system, which is a large pediatric hospital system in Phoenix. The technology was built and iterated on within that hospital system, tested and validated technically and clinically, and then took in a bit of grant and a bit of venture funding, spun out into an individual company, and is now, and we will probably do, it's a small business, not venture backable anymore, more of a lifestyle business. We'll probably do between $3 and $4 million in revenue over the next 12 months, on a recurring basis with a team of 3 or 4. So Arl Analytics, big chunky idea, blue chip venture capital. Oh, the TechCrunch articles and the PR and the conferences and all this. Amazing, really fun, really hard. Or something that ended up not being venture backable, much more niche, also fostered through grant and corporate, strategic spin out. Um, and is now just a really fun side hustle, lifestyle business, right? So I'm giving you two personal examples. One, big, hard, chunky tech, which most of you guys I think, on the call are probably likely to be aimed at. Big markets, really hard technology, highly regulated, lots and lots of federal funding available, lots of VCs interested, big companies that had big problems that we helped to solve. Took 8 years, right? Patient Science took a couple years and was spun out, stood up, and then acquired, uh, and is now a really fun side hustle for myself and my technical co-founder. Um, so it doesn't have to be these big, deep tech, space tech. We're going to Mars. We're going to change the entire system. This can be really effective to fund more niche companies that don't require venture capital. But for us in Patient Signs, we got to revenue quickly, and that revenue was substantial enough to fund the business. And so we didn't need to raise any venture funding. We keep and own the company ourselves, but we leaned on grant and family office money early and technology incubation early via the corporate. So hopefully that gives you two really clear-cut examples of technologies I've worked on personally that highlight the use of this and a bit of the story behind it. The last thing I'm going to say is I just want to close with many of you on the call are CEOs or aim to be CEOs. Um, don't overspend time on technology if you're the CEO. Okay. If you want to spend a lot of time on technology, you're a technologist, maybe you should be a CTO or a CSO or a CMO or a CIO. If you're the CEO, though, you have to spend time on customers, investors, strategic partnerships, recruiting of team, recruiting of customers, recruiting of investors. And you have to be a phenomenal storyteller. You have to be able to tell me what you do in a few sentences, and I have to be able to understand it. And then when I ask you questions, you have to tell me your story in a really effective way. Your job is reducing the uncertainty across the entire company, not just in technology. And oftentimes we see, CEOs that are really excited about an SBIR or a phase one. Um, they are not spending enough time across these other areas. So I just remember to ask yourself, what is my highest and best use? If I'm the CEO, even if I don't like it, my core priorities it, are not really technology. Some, but definitely not all your time. The vast majority of your time should be aimed in these other areas. Um, okay, so just quick few takeaways, and then we'll leave the rest of the time for Q&A. Um, use this kind of non-dilutive funding strategically. Don't use it as the end all be all. It won't be. It'll help you validate it. It'll help you get to the next milestone, but use it strategically and understand that it comes with a layer of complexity from a reporting and governance structure. Uh, it will eat up a lot of your mind share. So use it strategically. Use it when you fundamentally believe it makes sense for your long-term enterprise growth. Use those vehicles. Seek out ones with matching funds whenever possible. That certainly is strategic. Um, Build around the market, not the grant. So this is really important. Think about your market size, customers, problem you're solving within that market first. Don't just think about the grant. For anybody that's academic in here, that's hard. Academics love to write grants. They love to fund their labs that way. It's really difficult for them to pick their head up and look out at the broad market. So I'm encouraging everybody here to think about the market, build around the market, not the grant. Um, Always focus on reducing risk across the four key areas I mentioned. It's not just about technology de-risk. It's, in my opinion, today technology is almost table stakes. Market, team, and capital are your highest areas of concern. And then think like a CEO. Focus on business, team building, storytelling. Make sure that the business has enough capital to operate. Don't just think like a researcher. Um, okay, we'll pause there, John. Right on the hour. How about that? Nailed it. We'll move into QAs now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and happy to open it up to any and all questions you all might have. And John/Alejandro, if you'll help me moderate here. I see some things in the chat. Okay, I'm happy to share the slides, Erwin. I think you asked. Um, yeah. Uh, okay. How large was the team that worked on A2? How many founder, co-founder partners? Okay, so we started with three. The At A2, the initial technology was built by two academic founders at ASU. One was an MIT grad who was very good at signal processing and AI, early AI, machine learning, and the other was a speech language pathologist who taught in the nursing school, the healthcare school. Those two had worked on different motor and neurological issues for a long time and had built a very early version of the technology in their labs using some PhD and master's level students, where they could assess speech via an app and then analyze that via a cloud-based system. That's really all they had. I joined as the third co-founder. I was doing some consulting work with ASU at the time, and I got to know Julian Visar and unwound a VC technology development company that I had built in the Bay Area at the time, moved to the Phoenix area, and launched A2 with them. So we had three co-founders to start. Uh, Before we sold the company, there was probably 60 employees, and then a whole team of contractors beyond that. Um, and we had dozens and dozens of strategic partners. We had our clinical side, which was Barrow Neurological, the Mayo Clinic, a lot of our pharma companies. We had integration partnerships with Metadata and IQVIA and several others in the clinical trial space. We had we also had, technology partnerships across our hardware devices as well. And we had a whole team of regulatory by the end of it because we were engaged on multiple FDA applications at any one time. So it's a very large team. very robust and kind of multifaceted. We had great technologists, great clinical staff, great operators, great salespeople. But it took a long time to go from lab, which was research for 20 years probably in Julie's work, and then it took us 8 years to get the business stood up and exited. Um, let's see. Biggest single lesson. So, Yen, good question. Biggest single lesson you've learned from founding several sites. So, I think the highest and best use one is a really important lesson. You cannot do this alone, so you need to be surrounded by people who complement your skill set and will challenge you and hold you accountable. That's a really important thing I learned. My first couple of early ventures I tried to do solo and failed. And I just didn't really understand how to tell a story, a compelling enough story, and how important it was to get that right to attract early co-founders and attract early customers and investors. So my couple of early startups probably good ideas, but I just didn't really understand how to put together a team, and I was probably overconfident in my own skill set. Um, now I know my highest and best use. I can tell a story. I can get people excited about an idea. I understand the financial side, the market making side, know how to do deals, but I'm not a ones and zeros kind of guy, right? I'm not going to code. I'm not going to build the app. I'm not going to be the clinical expert who's had 25 years of clinical practice. So it was important for me to augment and enhance my own skill set because you certainly can't do it alone. I also um, I also relied a lot on mentorship. Um, I didn't realize how important that would be over my career, but it's the reason I do the work I'm doing here with Arrowhead is I'm a small town ag boy who just works hard. I'm not smart. I'm never the smartest person in the room. Um, I just work hard and love people and love to solve big complex problems. Forever curious. I'm constantly working on something different. So um, for me to go from such humble beginnings to where I'm at now would not have happened without a few key mentors who fundamentally changed the way I think. I had one, her name was Julie Murray. She had a small corporate C-suite coaching company called Velocity. She became a partner in one of my businesses that I spun out while I was in Chicago. It was focused on managed care at the time. Uh, which is now embedded in healthcare. But at the time, it was kind of a groundbreaking idea. Hey, what if we manage people as opposed to like manage their health and we're more proactive instead of reactive? It was about when Obamacare was coming out. Anyway, she had this massive consulting business. She was the former SVP at GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, which was a major pharmaceutical company. And she said, Daniel, I'll come into this business, but I'm going to have to coach you. You think you're great, but you're not. You can be. Maybe someday you will be. But if I come into this company and be a partner with you, you have to do what I say when I say it. And she was a C-suite coach to top, F50 companies. So I was very lucky. It was very humbling, very uncomfortable experience. But the way I interact with my my co-founders, my team, top to bottom, my partners, my customers, my interaction even on this call has been fundamentally changed by my interaction with her. Since that time, one of my other mentors, Scott Walchek, he was one of the seed investors in Baidu and Peloton and several other big companies. I was his first hire at a company called Trove. That's how I made my way to the Bay Area. Over time, we grew a friendship, and he has been somebody I've called on when I've had very difficult, challenging discussions, and particularly with my VC board, where there were very complex problems and challenges and hard decisions to make. Um, it can be a lonely place to be if you're the CEO and you have these hard decisions to make. I would call Scott, and Scott would be a resource for me that again wouldn't be here today without that. So I think a bit of humility, a bit of understanding my highest and best use that I need great people around me to be successful. Um, those are probably the biggest human side takeaways I can give you. Again, good question though. Um, Okay, so there's a question coming in from Element. It looks like Element, if you're on, can you reframe this? I am aimed at B to G. Can you define your question here, Element, if you're on? And John, I'm not sure if you see that question in the chat. Maybe you can also help some context there.
I do. B2G here is business to government.
Yeah, no, I get that, but do you have any comments
Oh.
on SBIR translating to Dow, NASA as clients? I
Um,
guess this is really probably a question aimed at how do you go and sign, government customers, right?
yeah, and I've spoken to Element a couple of times. Um,
Okay.
so we've got some discussion going on, outside of it. But I think that and I don't know if he'll perk up here, but um, I'm not sure if he's interested in your experience potentially working with the government, and have you ever, worked directly with and been a contractor for Department of War, NASA, etc.
Yeah, it's a good question, Element. Limited experience here. In the work with DARPA, some of our technology ended up, being used there. Um, I don't have that side, like sort of NASA level experience though, candidly. I would argue it's probably similar though to working with any large institution in that you have to have your security and your governance right. You have to have your team right. You have to have your technology validated to a certain level. Um, but no, I unfortunately I don't have sort of that NASA government level experience. I primarily, B2C, B2B, B2B2C, et cetera, that side of it. Um, okay, what is your guidance on hiring? Who and when? What has worked and what hasn't? This is a really good question. Some of this is many on the call may be pre-revenue, probably pre-revenue, or early revenue, probably early grant level if you're there yet. So attracting a team is really difficult. This gets into the storytelling and the ability to attract people, unite people around what you're trying to build. Much of it will be, okay, founding team. If you don't have a founding team in place, there are mechanisms in which you can use, offering them, potential share or ownership of the company, which should be subject to vesting if they're not on the initial cap table, by the way. So that's a conversation for another day. But um, you do have that ability to bring in co-founders that complement your skill set and bring them into the ownership of the company. That's one way to do it in the absence of paying them. Be a great story, just be a good storyteller. And that's the first thing I would say is just figure out what am I building and how can I compel people to come along this journey with me? How do I get them as excited about this thing as I am? Um, so that's the second thing. So first thing, complement yourself with others with complementary highest and best uses. You can use equity as a driver, or incentives as a driver to attract them and be a great storyteller. Um, what I would caution against are, you know, the idea that you can use an advisory board to get there. It will be false. Advisors are going to spend a very limited amount of time helping you, maybe an hour a week, a couple of hours a week. They're going to require a small slug of equity as well. Advisors are useful, but I wouldn't view them as sort of team building. Um, I've made that mistake before where I said, okay, I've got this great advisory board. I'm going to lean on them all the time. They're going to bring me so much value, and it ended up being a very mixed bag. So don't do that. Add advisors, but don't think that they're going to solve the day to day for you. For anybody that's in New Mexico, there are resources that you can lean on that can be fractional. They can be sort of complementary in the early days. I'm thinking about some of the lab work for technology development. I'm thinking about even Arrowhead resources. Um, and that network that Arrowhead has built can be really useful in those early days. But hopefully, you'll be able to our conversation today is grants. Hopefully, maybe you can achieve a grant outcome that can help fund That's the best way to do it, is to just pay people generally what they're worth. So in the absence of capital, you're probably relying on equity. With capital, whether it be SBIR or preferably revenue slash, investor, the best way to attract talent is to pay them money, you know. Equity is Equity's paper, right? The best way to do it is to try to find a way to pay them real money, what they're worth. Um, let's see. Validation milestones that are most compelling to grant reviewers, investors, and potential customers. And where do those overlap? So grant reviewers. So I've worked with the NSF on this as a commercial as a commercial reviewer. Okay, not a technical reviewer. So there's two sides of the reviews typically. One is technical, one is commercial. Most of most of the real analysis happens on the technical side. My commercial oversight at the NSF meetings I was at reviewed lots and lots of applications. I'm really almost a gut check. It's like a finger to the wind. Does this hold sort of commercial viability potentially long term? Imagine they accomplish all their aims. Does this have some level of commercial validity to it? Is the commercial side of the application written effectively? Are the words spelled right? Do the thoughts hang together? Um, that's really for most of those super early level grants, phase ones. You got to have the commercial side. It will get reviewed, but the technical side is where I would say 70% of that analysis will occur. As you flip into phase two or phase threes, that flips a little bit, but um, the most compelling thing to grant reviewers is typically, how amazing is this, how groundbreaking, how different is this technology, um, and how well does it fit within the grant call that we've made. On the investor side, nowadays, the most compelling milestone is traction, customer revenue traction. Um, that is the most important, the most compelling um, milestone for investors will be revenue. It'll be customer traction. Then falling out from that, it'll be, have you achieved some type of technology breakthrough? It'll be, is it the right team? The financials make sense, all those other IP. But without a doubt, today it's revenue. If I told you 10 years ago, raising for A2, I really didn't need revenue to achieve my initial series seed. In fact, I ended up with six term sheets from different types of investors, all blue chip VCs, competing for the initial seed round right at the time I was achieving my first revenue milestone. I didn't need it. I could have closed that seed round with multiple leads. We way oversubscribed the round and matched it with $1 million in grant funding, by the way, which drove that initial seed round to 5.5 million, I believe, if I recall, 5.6 million. That initial seed round would not have required revenue. So fast forward 10 years, we're not seeing funding go to companies in the absence of real material commercial milestones. It doesn't have to be revenue, but you really got to have a compelling story on customer and revenue validation. For customers, it's, are you solving my problem? Is it a better mousetrap if it's something that's, being reinvented? Um, it's, can I actually buy it? Can I actually get it? So we sell a lot of enterprise level stuff. I sell to hospitals for patient signs, for example. That takes 24 months, right? And you have to go through vendor validation and audits and technical validation and audits and procurement, and they usually RFP the ask. So from a customer perspective, it's the highest level do you solve the problem I'm looking to solve. But then underneath that, Martin, don't forget, everybody here, don't forget, there's always a path and a process by which your customers will adopt your technology. What is the switching cost, right? I can tell you for firsthand, um, we had lots of pharmaceutical companies that wanted to use A2, but had already embedded other biomarkers. So adding another confounded their analysis. calculation. So they loved us, but they couldn't buy, right? These types of adoption questions are why you need to engage with your customers early and often and understand what does it really take to get from, hey, that sounds interesting to, hey, I've deployed you in my ecosystem. There's several things in which you have to validate. Um, so that's a great question, Martin. But just don't lose sight that it's not just, hey, I really like your product. It's okay, then how do I actually adopt and embed and use your product over the long term? Um, okay, so a question from Johnny about the current opportunities. Oh man, there are a lot. The funding, sort of perspective has changed a little bit over the last few years. Um, just with changes at the top federally. But there's still a lot of money out there, particularly in the DoD. What I do, guys, and what I recommend is Chat or Gemini or whatever your favorite, AI system is. Everybody has one now. I have built a prompt that I reference back to all the time, and I'm constantly looking for, hey, I'm building this for this particular purpose in this particular sector. I provide as much context as I can, and I ask to be curated a list of opportunities that fit. That's what I do. I'm just using. I mean, most of the stuff is publicly available, so you can query it that way. That would be my advice, because there are so many different opportunities. You know your company best. You know what you want to build best, and most of the stuff is public, so it's pretty easy to get to. Um, they are very competitive. So Johnny makes a point in here that they are very competitive. They are, and that competition is forever. It's always there. Yeah, you have to really really grow a muscle of grant application and writing. There's an art to that. It's more art than science, especially for the early phases. Um, so my recommendation to everybody on the call who wants to make sure that they don't miss anything, you can build prompts to query this stuff all the time. And I would just wake up every day and do it if you want. Wake up every week, once a week, beginning of the week. Okay, what's new, chat? Tell me, Um, EPA, NOAA, USDA. This is probably a good question for John, actually. John, you may know more about these particular groups and if recent opportunities have been released. I actually don't know. I don't work in those three areas.
Yeah, I was actually going to jump in on your last one too. So NSF, just as a broad statement for anyone that may not know, NSF will fund almost anything. I like to say anything that they think is cool.
Yeah.
Um, so they're sort of agnostic to whatever realm that you're working in. So that opportunity is available, and it's a relatively easy first pitch, the first piece of that. So if you are interested in SBIR just at all, we do recommend most people go to NSF and put in that project pitch. It's about 4 pages. It's a very condensed version of what your actual application would look like, just so that you can get a yes no from them off the bat, and they'll give you the reason why. So if it's a no, then you can improve and either resubmit to them or take that advice and go to potentially a different agency, maybe with a better fit. And then with DoD, I'm going to put a link in the chat that is um, their website, so you can go and take a look at what options they have available right now. There's over 70 options available for topics there. Just so if you're interested, you can go there and take a look. If you've got any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that off call. Just send me an email about it, and I'll put my email in the chat too, just quickly. And then to the question at hand, EPA, NOAA, and USDA, I've not seen anything released from them. I know that EPA has been sort of in the background with SBIR stuff for the past 2 years. They haven't really had a lot going on, but I did see them at this most recent SBIR conference, and so they are active, they are working, they are trying to get a solicitation going, and I'll take a look at all three of these while we're still in the chat, and I'll put links in the chat here when I find them. But just off the top, no, I have not seen those open yet.
Yeah, thanks, John. John is a phenomenal resource for everybody on the call. I mean, he knows this space day to day better than I do. I know it really from a high level operator level. I rely on my clinical teams, my development teams to query this stuff mostly. Um, Again, highest and best use, and they're better at grant writing and grant sourcing than I am. So I'm lucky in that way that I have some people that can help educate me. The John's a phenomenal Arrowhead generally phenomenal resource for everybody that's on this call, by the way. Lots of information about how to do this and where to get at them. And there's federal level stuff, there's state level stuff. So lean on Arrowhead and Johnny here. Yeah, and yes, NSF, it's a long process. That's why I say, the cycle of some of these grants can be long and arduous and frustrating. It's very likely you get a no as much as a yes. And those no's are useful too, though, because the no's will usually provide some bit of feedback and you can reapply for some or all. At least that's been my experience. We missed more than we got. So yeah, it's a long process, can take 4 to 6 months or longer in some cases. And then you may get a no. So just be mindful of that. That's why I said early on, I learned really quick. We cannot wait for grants. We have to get out and fundraise. We have to get out and build customer base. We have to get out and validate our revenue side because the grant cycle just ends up being very slow and arduous. And then you might be waiting and waiting and waiting and get a no. So if you're not doing anything in the interim and you've hung everything on that ask or that request or application, um, that's a lot of eggs in a single basket. So highly encourage you to diversify your work every day while you're waiting those 6 months. Um, John, we have a question from Trisha. NSF site link, or do you know the best NSF link to share?
Yes. So
Yeah,
I'll put it in the chat. I'll respond
yeah,
to
I
you.
pop it over there in the chat. And then yeah, and that does look like the right Arrowhead website. But if you have that available as well, John Yen has also asked for the Arrowhead link, best Arrowhead link. And there's a lot of experts in their network now, Yen. So for anybody working across different technologies, you need accounting help, legal help, um, fundraising, IP, tech transfer. Yeah, there's a lot of resource available via Arrowhead. What other questions do we have, everyone? So I'm available for the next little bit and happy to take any additional questions, provide any additional input. Okay, Trisha has a question in the chat. Can you talk about pilots, how to set them up? Should you charge? Okay, so good question. Trisha, the answer is should you charge? It is yeah. If you can, yes. Yes, you definitely want to try to charge. The optics from an investor perspective in particular, but even if you're thinking about it, the optics of a paid versus non-paid pilot are miles apart, right? A non-paid pilot is going to put capital team focus stress on any company. So if you're doing a non-paid pilot, you're not going to have any revenue. Hopefully, your customer will convert, but you're taking a really big risk. So any non-paid pilots, be careful and try to view it through a long-term lens and in your mind, put the story together so that it makes sense. Because you're going to be allocating time, energy, resource, and focus to that pilot. Now, there's important learnings that can come out of that and should come out of that, regardless of whether or not the customer ultimately ends up converting. So you're going to gain knowledge, you're going to gain experience at the very minimum. Okay. The paid side, if you can convince, especially a large customer, an enterprise level big customer, to pay you for a pilot, That's the best case scenario because then they're putting capital and team at risk just like you. And that's a story you can tell investors. That's a story you can tell yourself. Hey, we've got, even if it's like we just did a pilot with the largest hospital system in the country out of Nashville. It was a pretty substantial pilot. They paid us 40 grand. They had never, they at least they said, I don't know if this is true or not. They said they never paid for a pilot before. And I was able to convince him to pay. And then I took that story to my board, and they were very, it was a very, even though we lost money, we spent way more than 40 grand to deliver the pilot. That proof point that a massive customer was willing to pay for a pilot to explore our technology is a really compelling story. So whenever possible, Tricia and team here, aim for a paid pilot. To set them up, you're going to need to understand that even as a pilot partner, you're going to have to have some level of vendor validation. So at least in my world, most of our customers are large entities. They have procurement, they have vendor audits, they have vendor requirements, they have privacy policies, they have cybersecurity policies. They have sort of a minimum barrier to entry. So, Tricia, whatever market you're entering for the broader group here, whatever market you're entering, this is part of that customer discovery. You have to understand what is the floor to penetrate this market. What cyber, controls do I have to have? How do I handle their data? Who sees what SOPs, right? What certifications will I need? So setting up a pilot is just like you want to position it just like setting up a commercial deployment because your hope is that once the pilot period is done, bang, you have a customer. That's what you're really aiming for. So you should come out of any pilot you're doing try to understand what that minimum bar to entry is and have at least that minimum bar. So from an internal perspective, first of all, you have the knowledge and understanding of, okay, this is what our customers are going to require minimum. We have to build that so that we can deliver the pilot. And if we deliver well, hopefully they'll convert and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just kind of continue forward. Okay. Good question though, Tricia. Pilots are often mismarketed by CEOs, at least in our investor pitches, right? So somebody we say they'll give a slide with logos across the bottom. And it just takes one question. Okay, so you have all these logos. Who are these people? Wow, these are our customers. Okay, what are they paying you? Like tell us about the business model. Tell us about what you're charging, what's your margins. And if it goes in, oh, well, they're all unpaid pilots, um, then they're not real customers and it just calls into question, the thinking there. So I think they're good. They're really good for getting your start. If you can get them paid for, do that and then also use it to understand your minimum barrier to entry. Um, okay, Martin's asking about early strategic partnerships during the pilot stage. So strategic partnerships can be really fun. My first job in the Bay Area was a VP of strategic partnerships for this big insure tech company. My job was to do deals with like Amazon, early API integration deals. To do, pick up large scale data sets or to augment our, insurance legalese. I won't get into the weeds, but my job was to source and really look at, market making and deal making and discovery through a universe of strategic partnerships that we thought might be valuable. Strategic partnerships can manifest via your sales side. So channel partners can be really interesting. For the hospital business I mentioned, we use CDW and SHI, which are large scale resellers. Those help our sales motion dramatically. I have no sales team. I just lean on our channel partners to provide organic inbound sales activity. Took us a long time to set that up. We had to have a whole level of again foundational pieces put together. But once we did, and CDW did a deal with us, they realized they could make good money with us. Their partners were happy. And so now they provide our entire sales motion, which is amazing. All of our external marketing via our channel partners. That's taken me 3 or 4 years to set up, Martin, but it's been very, very successful. Um, we also have partnerships with the large EMRs, so Cerner, Epic, a few others, where we had to set up our direct integrations and pass all of their vendor and partner requirements. Couldn't exist in some of the hospitals that we serve without that integration. So that's another version of sort of a integrated sort of data side strategic partnership. These things come in different shapes and sizes, Martin. I think as an early stage founder, CEO, your job is to really understand the broader market you're entering and the key um, stakeholders and influencers to that market and engage with them and see if you can get them, see if it makes sense to work with them to help their business and for them to help your business. Strategic partnership, partner being the key word. Both entities need to win, and if both entities win, they make more money. That's the idea. Um, so done dozens and dozens and dozens of early strategic partner deals. And candidly, getting some of those bigger strategics to work with you early is a really significant customer side story to tell as well. It's a good way to validate. Good question, Martin. Um, Were you able to interact with SBIR directors, officers, topic authors, etc.? So yes, so Element, good question. Yes, every grant that we did we had a I forget the name of them now, but we had somebody assigned to us that we had to report to. So these program officers is probably the best term for that. Yes, without a doubt. We went and saw them in DC. We would sit with them. We would interact with them once, whenever they needed, honestly, whenever they required, and even more so, to tell them what we were doing, to report to them if required. Um, they can become really good advocates for you and help teach you and coach you on how to be successful with the requirements of the grant, and then how to potentially take another step to go from, say, phase one to phase two. So yes, in every case, we were assigned these program officers. I forget the name of them. Um, NSF had a term for them. So did NIH. Anyway, these are experts that are assigned to you that you work with through the life cycle of the grant. Yeah. Um, and but I should caveat this because the last part of your question, before topics open, no, only after. We were watching the external sites that say John shared, and then we would apply, and then we would be assigned somebody to work with us once we were successful. Um, some relationship prior to solicitation, no, but we did keep relationships after. Afterwards, we kept long-term relationships with everybody we interacted with. It's just useful. It's just good education. It's good hygiene that way. Um, I would say one area that we did interact with that was very useful for us, and I would say for the organization as well, was with the FDA. So at A2 in particular, we started interacting with the FDA early. We were one of the early drivers of, well, at the time was deep learning, machine learning, which now is, broadly AI. But the FDA really didn't understand how to think about speech and digital biomarkers at the time, and actually began to lean on us to help them construct some of their initial frameworks. So we began to build relationships with the FDA, our governing body, our regulatory body, early. And then it was way before our application, right? So there are different stakeholders here. When we talked a lot about grants and my experiences after you win one, then you're assigned somebody, you work with that person, you keep that relationship long term. But for anybody that's in a regulated space, engage with the regulators early. They'll teach you and teach you as much of what not to do as what to do. But I super useful interactions for us with our regulatory bodies early. Good question. Okay. Who else? Anyone else? Still have about 20 minutes to go. John, any topics that I might have missed for today's session that you'd like to cover, or that maybe you've got some questions that could aim us as we wrap up here.
I don't know that I've got anything. I think you did a pretty good job. I've got one small note on that last question that you answered, if I could throw a little piece on there
Please
too.
do. Yeah, please do.
Um, One of the things that we encourage our clients to do is make those connections early with the SBIR agencies. And that's one of the reasons why we have micro grants to help fund travel to get to SBIR conferences. Those happen twice a year. Or potentially to any other conference where you can do customer discovery or talk to the representative agencies or things like that. But you definitely can get in and have those conversations, and we encourage you to do so so that you can sort of get a gut check before you ever put in an application. And so that's a really good way just to sort of feel out the agency, what they're interested in, what they're not interested in. They may have direction for you to go to a different funding opportunity the agency has, or maybe point you in the direction of a different agency altogether, something that you haven't thought about. And so we absolutely do encourage you to reach out and do that. And that on top of it, there have been times where maybe you know the agency that's going to be a good fit for you, but they don't have a topic that works for you at the moment. And you go and you make that connection and talk to them about what you're working on. And in the next cycle, you see something that exactly is a perfect fit for what you're working on. That doesn't happen all the time, but that is something that we have seen.
Yeah, that's great, John. Again, from my vantage point, I wasn't out front on the so those early interactions. So we had our other teams do that. So that's great. That's good advice. Yeah, and of course you can stay in touch. I have office hours available via Arrowhead anytime. And then I'm on LinkedIn. If you can find me, Daniel Jones on LinkedIn, good luck. Uh, Steve is asking to provide the link for the SBIR conferences, John. Maybe you have something that's helpful for Steve and the team there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's under the a broad title Tech Connect. It's really a conglomerate of different conferences that all come together. But I will put a link in the chat here real quick.
Thanks, Alejandro. Yeah, and anybody else that's interested, there's the LinkedIn uh, link for me. And then John has just popped in the Tech Connect link as well. It's a good question. Any other final questions or comments we'd like to cover? How important was legal disclosures to your process? So it depends on on which process you're referencing, Tricia. If you can you clarify in terms of your grant?
Yeah, like with the biomedical stuff, I was just curious, like, um, if there was any, I don't know, I guess I'm curious about um how you protected yourself,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense. Like my what I'm trying to do is educate people about um their communication skills and um and I just met with someone through Arrowhead and said that I needed to come up with some kind of legal protection so that it doesn't cross over into, like, mental health advice. And
Yeah.
I'm just doing something really simple, and so it just, when you were talking about the biomedical product that you guys put together, I was just curious how much that came into play for you. Did you worry about the risks?
Yeah, yes, for sure. Oh, so I think it was you and I, Tricia, who actually met on that point. My advice
Yes.
being get a little bit of legal advice, make sure you have all your, the just the fine print covered as you're interacting with people. I think that
Right.
advice is useful for everybody on this call, whether you're in medical or not. Any industry where you're touching customers, you just want to be careful. Just make sure that you have your appropriate disclosures, and if you're operating in Europe, that you understand GDPR, all these things. So there's just a minimum level of compliance that every company is going to have, right? And so just understand what that framework is. For in Tricia's case, you're not offering medical advice, so you're not going to rise really to the FDA care, but there is still a minimum level of care you want to take with your patient's data, your customers' data, your customer interactions, your confidentiality, that kind of stuff. You have a privacy policy, all these things. So there's always going to be a bare minimum framework that every company will have to know and understand. I just highly encourage people to have a good business attorney. Um, if you can, if for those of you who have some level of capital to pay an attorney, it's important that you have some legal resource to bounce these questions off of. I'm not an attorney. I have always tried to hire the best early stage business counsel I can. And for us, across both of my healthcare industries, and even before that in fintech, two very highly regulated markets, right, and industries. So in healthcare, we care a lot about, things like HIPAA and, data sharing and privacy and PII and that kind of thing. But we also really care about what the FDA says about, the level of our devices, right? Sometimes they were class one, which means minimal risk. Sometimes they were class two. We did a few applications where that was brand new, de novo, never been seen before by the FDA, so required a much higher level of rigor and disclosure. So the signage, application company, patient signs, much lower level. All we're doing is surfacing information that the hospital inputs via their EMR. We're not doing any AI. We're not holding any data. We're not transacting or selling any data. So it's a very clean regulatory story, very clean legal and disclosure story, right? So for any business in any industry, it's incumbent upon the CEO in particular to deeply understand the minimum level of compliance that you have to comply with. In our case, as we grew, A2 in particular, I needed business counsel because I was doing venture capital raising and debt raising and all these things, um, and building a team and doing commercial deals. But I also needed regulatory experts, right? We needed regulatory experts to help us with all of the complexities of just being in healthcare and doing diagnostics and therapeutic, right? So again, like if you're going to space, you're going to have a certain minimum level of legal a floor essentially to operate your business. It's important for every CEO to understand that. And the best way to do that is to get some counsel um, from a legal expert in the industry.
Did you use any grant money to pay for any of those people? Or was that just
I
from
don't
other capital that
think
you raised?
so. I don't think so, John. I don't know if you have a finer level of detail on what's allowed now and what's not. I think we used other sources of capital to pay our legal team. And John may have a little bit more insight on the fine print there than I do.
If you're interested in SBIR specifically, they do have a sort of a subset of funding within that they call TABO or Technical and Business Assistance. And through that, you can hire an attorney. They say for IP related stuff, you can use the funding for that. But they've recently, this year with the new reauthorization, they've expanded it so you can use it for
Oh,
more
see,
things.
that's good. That's good.
And so that definitely is an opportunity that can help you out. They've also mandated that that is an opportunity across all agencies. Previously, each agency was able to choose if they were going to do it or not. Now the only choice is it in addition to the award ceiling or does it come out of the award ceiling? And through a phase one, that's $6,500. So it's not a huge volume, especially, for some of these types of things, if you're paying an attorney to help you out with stuff. I know that gets pretty pricey pretty quickly,
Yeah.
but that's definitely a lot more than you'd have otherwise. And that can get you quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Trisha. And it is hard. I mean, for every early stage founder, it's really hard to figure out the capital. So the early capital side is really tricky because you need all this you need this all input from these experts, and they're all expensive. I mean, I had an attorney in the Bay that was charging like $1,300 an hour, and I was trying to do something. I was like, you know, so yes, it's tricky from a capital perspective. It's good news, John, that that's been expanded a bit. I did not know that, so that's good stuff. Um, During the pilot phase, strategic partnerships, how would it be best to being building an internal team while the IP protection is being developed? Martin, I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't know if your hearing can come off of mute and maybe put additional context on that. I'm not sure he's there. He's asking pilot phase and strategic partnerships. I think I think the message I would say about IP protection is for those of you building in partnership with an academic or a lab, you're going to have your licensing agreement that should govern how, co-development or ideas are generated and who owns what. And that agreement will frame that out. As I mentioned earlier, it's a complicated agreement and there's a bunch of teeth in there and it's hard and long, but the reality is that that's a wonderful engagement over the long term because you can develop IP in partnership with your academics, or your national labs, or your clinical partners, et cetera, in a way that's known and should flow through an exclusive basis to the business. If you have strategic partnerships, there's usually a boundary. Unless you have the in the partnership agreement um, legal language that accounts for co-development or something that's like a joint venture, usually there's you're going to want to put a pretty defined wall up between, hey, I own my stuff, I'm going to develop stuff. Hey, you own your stuff, you're going to develop stuff. And when and if we do something together, here's who owns what and how that's going to work. Your strategic partnership deals can be very simple, like a rev share deal with a channel partnership, like I do with the signage company. They make a commission when we do a deal. I own my stuff, they own their stuff. It's pretty simple. Um, but where there's, say, data sharing or integration, and then something new is built, that's where your strategic partnership and IP considerations will come into play. And just need to be, I'm usually very transparent with my partners up front. I want it to be a long-term win-win. So I say, hey, here's our incentives. Here's where we want to be at the end of this deal. Here's what we'd like to own. Here's what we're open to co-developing, and here's what we're not, and be transparent with that. Try to get that framed up in some type of term sheet. Iron that out before you bring in a bunch of attorneys. Once you have the high level principle agreed to, your IP should be, sort of baked into that final agreement. That's how I've typically handled it before. Um, what's the best route for a university researcher to start up a company? Identify the company chief operating officer. Um, That's a good question. So, depending on the university, most universities will have a tech transfer office. NMSU uses Arrowhead, ASU uses SkySong. They all have sort of this tech transfer augmentation available to academic researchers and faculty. If you come up with a great new idea, you want to spin that out, and you've been paid by the university, well, you're going to need that license agreement. Um, and most of those tech transfer offices, kudos to Arrowhead for this as well, will have a vast network of potential, CEOs or COOs that can complement, somebody that's in the academic setting. Um, so there's usually lots of network effect you can get by talking to a group like Arrowhead, telling folks like me and others, hey, here's what I'm building. I'm looking for a CEO to help me. Getting the word out that way through your network and through Arrowhead and others similar to Arrowhead can be a really effective tool. In the short term, you're really the CEO, you're really the COO, you're really the CTO, you're really the CFO. So in the short term, you're everything. Over the long term, you're trying to build a team around you that augments and enhances your skill set. Um, so I would say lean on your academic tech transfer office and your network and be transparent about what you need and be willing to offer, if you don't have money, offer, co-founding status with somebody coming into the business. This gets back to the storytelling and being able to attract people to what you're building, but lean on your tech transfer office and your associated, state events. You can go to your incubator events. If you're in Albuquerque, you go to the rainforest. There's lots and lots of activity and folks that want to help. You can also look to fractional. There's fractional resources out there that are much more lower cost, lower risk that can, work on a project basis, for example, to achieve some particular milestone that you want to do. Um, and I think from an SBIR perspective, um, these are hyper competitive. So really read through the details of the call of the opportunity and ensure that, okay, if you don't have a particular team member that this particular application is going to require, how can I write the grant in a way that says I'm going to find that person and here's who's agreed to come on once we get the funding. That's a way to do it, etc. So I, I don't know how relevant that is to most of the applications. John may be able to speak more to that. Because in every grant that I've written, I've been able to say I have this particular team or I have this particular strategy for team. But John, if you have something else you might want to round out on, um, you know, team associated with SBIR and other opportunity. I'm not sure what Johnny means there, but anything you'd like to add there, John, might be helpful.
Yeah, another piece that I would jump in and caution you on is if you're a university researcher applying for SBIR and STTR, well, SBIR opportunity specifically, the principal investigator for that SBIR must be primarily employed by the small business.
Yeah.
And that's one issue that several of the researchers that I've spoken to and tried to promote here at the university, it's one of the things that they struggle with is how do they maintain their professorship and then also have this business running on the side. And then the other thing that I would caution you on, again, this is not to stop you from doing it, right? But just to let you know, um, as Daniel mentioned, if the innovation that you are trying to commercialize was something that was created under your work through the university, that will have to go through the tech transfer office. And so you'll need the licensing agreement through the university to be able to bring that out into the business that you're spinning up. When you are applying to an SBIR, a very important thing that they are looking at is who's on the team. And what you can do in some cases, if you have a lower level person that you need, maybe you need someone who's going to help you out with writing code, you need someone that's, an electrical engineer, but that's not necessarily integral to the creation of the innovation. You can just write in that you're going to hire somebody for that position and then give a description of what that position will be. But if you're talking about principal investigator or people that are, of course, integral to the creation of it, people that you have to have on the team to really build it out, you need to have those people by name in your application. They may not be paid by you yet, but you at least need confirmation from the person that you would like to bring on, that they will work with you as soon as the money starts flowing.
Yeah, John, that's a good clarification. And so Johnny, if you're a university researcher, plan to stay at the university, this is where, my experience at A2 was that's fine. That's actually okay. And if that's where you want to be, that's probably your highest best use. I'm gonna lean on you for future R&D and future development and lean on your lab and take the best talent that wants to come out into industry. And, any IP that you're generating, is automatically going to flow into my business. Like that's a really nice virtual circle to set up. And it won't require you to come out of the academics. Trust me, I tried. Julian Visar, I tried every day. Hey man, you don't want to be a professor. Come into the business. Come on. And they were tenured, so they weren't going anywhere. So we set up, a licensing agreement with the academic that worked really well, that allowed us to take advantage of the best possible research coming out of the labs, allowed the researchers to stay in the lab, stay in the academic, and not come out. But we had a commercial entity, and I was running that and fully dedicated, and we began to bring in staff, and so we had a company that actually could adopt this stuff and actually take advantage of this stuff. And so anytime we had, a requirement for a PI, a requirement for other team, we had it, right? We had this commercial entity. So I would just caution you from being like 1 foot in and 1 foot out. That won't work. And I'd caution you from believing that you can set up, fund, scale, exit a business while also being a researcher. I think you need a team to do that with you. And that's either you take the leap and you go out and you do it full time and you're all in, or you bring in people that you trust and you take a back seat and you just do the research and you're going to stay in the academic. I don't know of a single one where somebody's been half in, half out and been able to take it all the way through without really significant external full-time dedicated operators supporting that business. Really hard to do. We're going to end on this question here with Steve. Should you avoid bringing on non-US citizens to be part of the SBIR? Johnny, what is the latest on this? This is a great question. We had several H-1Bs back in the day. I know a lot of companies have turned away here recently. So, John, I love your this is really a question for you, man.
Yeah, it really depends on where the person is from. And so if they are from a country that is considered adversarial to the US, then you do not want them on your team. It's going to make things just much, much harder. Um, for SBIR, the business must be owned and operated by US citizens, and the work must be done within the US. And preferably, if you're purchasing any equipment, they want you to purchase the equipment from US companies. That's not always possible. And there's some other things that we can get into with just purchasing equipment in general that you may not want to do it. You may want to rent it if that's possible. But that's a broader topic for later. Um, really, to answer your question, what the government is looking for is what they call foci. That's foreign ownership, control, and investment. So, is there any opportunity for a foreign entity to either control what happens to the innovation that's produced or to steal the intellectual property away from a US company? Um, Most countries, that's really not a huge concern, but there are several big ones that if you're trying to hire somebody from that company, there is a concern from the US government that data will get leaked, there'll be hacks, there'll be other issues with the intellectual property and potentially spilling. And again, it depends a little bit on which agency you're talking to, right? If you're working with Department of War, they're going to be more strict on it.
Yeah.
But that you're either taking away trade secrets from a business or you're taking federal secrets that they want for Department of War that they don't want anyone else to get access to. So it depends on who you're working with and how strict they're going to be on it. But as a general rule of thumb, if there's a way to avoid hiring somebody that's not a US citizen, it's probably going to be easier for you through the SBIR route.
Yeah, I totally agree. We had some great talent back in the day on H-1B generally. I mean, the SBIR lens is one, John, take it up one level, Steve and crew. What is the most viable thing for the business, right? We ultimately ended up doing less and less H-1B over time because of the cost, the attorney cost, the prosecution cost, I should say prosecution, the processing cost of all of that. Um, So for us, it became sort of capitally prohibitive to have too many. So I just, take your head, through the SBIR lens, there's one view. Also lift your head up and look over the macro, right? Just think about it from a cost and locality perspective and long-term, viability perspective as well. Okay, John, thank you so much. Honored to be here. Really, an honor. I'm humbled every time that I'm asked to do these kinds of things. You know, um, just a small town guy who's just lucky to be here, lucky to have this perspective, and honored. And hopefully, it was helpful to everybody that was on the call. And so, John and team, thank you all.
We appreciate having you. And thanks again for coming out and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.